Have you ever visited a place that feels like it has more to say than it lets on? Not because it's loud, not because it's trying to impress you, but because the streets feel layered. The buildings feel lived in. The river feels older than the city around it. And every block seems to carry a story that most people walk past without ever hearing. That's Ann Arbor. For most people, Ann Arbor is easy to explain. It's the University of Michigan. It's football Saturdays. It's students, bookstores, coffee shops, restaurants, old houses, and a downtown that still feels like a place people actually want to walk through. And all of that is true. But it's not the whole story. Because Ann Arbor did not begin as a college town. It did not begin as a brand. It did not begin with the big house, the Block M, or a campus full of students from around the world. It began with land, with water, with people who were here long before settlers ever drew lines on a map. It began with a river. And over time, that river town became a frontier village. That village became a railroad town. That railroad town became a university city. And that university city became one of the most influential communities in Michigan. Today, we're leaving Detroit and following history west. Not because Detroit's story ends there, but because Michigan history never stayed in one city. It moved along rivers. It moved along railroads. It moved through farms, schools, churches, neighborhoods, theaters, markets, protest signs, old houses, and people brave enough to build something they may never live long enough to fully understand. I'm Chris Hubble, and this is Streets of History, Ann Arbor, the Michigan town that became bigger than itself. Before Ann Arbor had a name, this place already mattered. The Huron River was not scenery. It was life. It carried people. It shaped movement. It fed communities. It connected one place to another before roads, before rail lines, before street signs, before city maps, before any of us could imagine this place as a college town. Long before European settlers arrived, this region was home to indigenous people whose lives were tied to the land and the waterways of southeastern Michigan. The Ojibwe, Ottawa, Potawatomi, Wyandot, and others knew this region in ways we never fully will. And when we tell the story of a city like Ann Arbor, it's tempting to start in 1824. It's cleaner that way. It gives us founders, dates, names, and a beginning that fits nicely on a historical marker. But history deserves better than clean. Because Ann Arbor did not begin when settlers arrived. That was simply when one chapter began. The land already had memory. The river already had meaning. The trails already had purpose. And the people who came later were stepping into a place that was already part of a much older story. That matters. Because one of the biggest mistakes we make with history is acting like places begin when people like us start writing them down. They don't. They begin long before that. The river was here first. And in many ways, it is still the reason Ann Arbor feels like Ann Arbor. You can stand beside it today and feel the pace of the city change. Downtown is moving, campus is moving, traffic is moving, students are moving, but the river moves differently. Slower, older, unbothered. And maybe that's why cities built around rivers feel different. Because water reminds us that we are not the first people to arrive here. And we will not be the last. By the early 1800s, Michigan was still a territory. Dense forest covered much of the landscape. Land speculation was everywhere. People were moving west, not just looking for property, but looking for possibility. And in 1824, two men arrived here with that exact idea. John Allen and Elijah Walker Rumsey. They purchased land, laid out a village, and began imagining a future where most people still would have seen woods, mud, and hard work. The story of the name has become local legend. Allen's wife was named Ann. Rumsey's wife was Mary Ann, and the land was surrounded by trees. Ann Arbor? Ann's Arbor? Ann Arbor. Whether every detail happened as neatly as the story gets told, the name stuck. And that name, born from a small frontier settlement, would one day be recognized around the world. But try to imagine this place in 1824. No university. No stadium, no bookstores, no medical campus, no downtown full of restaurants, No historic neighborhoods people fight to preserve. Just rough roads, dense trees, small buildings, and people trying to turn uncertainty into community. I think about that every time I walk through an old city. Every historic place we admire today began as somebody's gamble. Someone stood where there was almost nothing and imagined something permanent. That is how history gets built. Not all at once, not perfectly, but one risk at a time. Ann Arbor grew because people kept coming. Mills, stores, churches, homes, schools, taverns, blacksmith shops. The pieces of a frontier village slowly became the bones of a real town. But the decision that changed Ann Arbor forever came in 1837. The same year Michigan became a state. The University of Michigan moved from Detroit to Ann Arbor. That's one of those facts that sounds simple until you really sit with it. The University of Michigan did not begin in Ann Arbor. It began in Detroit in 1817, when Detroit was still the capital of the Michigan Territory. But 20 years later, Ann Arbor offered land. 40 acres, room to grow, and that land became the heart of the university. The Diag, a decision that could have seemed local at the time, ended up shaping the entire identity of the city. Because a university changes a town differently than a factory does. A factory brings workers. A university brings students, teachers, doctors, researchers, writers, engineers, artists, activists, visitors, and ideas. A factory makes products. A university makes people. And Ann Arbor became one of those rare cities whose greatest export was never something you could load onto a truck. It exported knowledge. It exported talent. It exported people who came here for a few years and carried the name Ann Arbor with them for the rest of their lives. That is a powerful thing. Walk around this campus today and you feel it immediately. This is not a university hidden away from the city. It is woven directly into it. Campus spills into downtown. Coffee shops become study halls. Old houses become rentals and offices. Bookstores become landmarks. Restaurants fill with students 1 hour and lifelong residents the next. The University of Michigan and Ann Arbor are not the same thing, but they are inseparable. And like any relationship that lasts almost 2 centuries, it's complicated. The university brought prestige. It brought medicine. It brought research. It brought architecture. It brought money, attention, and people from all over the world. But it also brought pressure. Pressure on housing, pressure on neighborhoods, pressure on affordability, pressure on the city's identity. Because when an institution becomes that large, the question becomes unavoidable. Does the city shape the university, or does the university shape the city? In Ann Arbor, the answer is yes. Both happened. And that tension is part of what makes this place so interesting.
This isn't just another real estate platform. This is something different. A place where every property has a story. Search with ease, but discover more than just location and price. Every space comes with context, history, and identity. You don't just see a home, you understand it. Want to sell? Create a listing that stands out by telling what makes your place unique. Save, share, and connect with people who value more than just square footage. We don't just sell homes. We take care of preserving and telling their story. Because every home has a story, let's discover yours. History loves company.
But Ann Arbor was never only a university town. That's the easy version of the story. The real version has railroads. Industry, publishing, markets, factories, neighborhoods, and everyday people building lives that had nothing to do with the classroom. In 1839, the Michigan Central Railroad reached Ann Arbor from Detroit, and that changed everything. Before the railroad, travel was slow. Roads were rough. Weather mattered. Distance felt bigger. After the railroad, Ann Arbor was connected to Detroit in a new way. People could move faster. Goods could move faster. Ideas could move faster. The railroad did not just bring trains. It brought momentum. It helped turn Ann Arbor from a young inland settlement into a connected city. And connected cities grow differently. You can still see the railroad's fingerprints if you know where to look. The tracks, the old depot, the industrial edges, the way certain buildings face movement, the way commerce collected near transportation. That's one of my favorite things about walking historic cities. The map still talks. A street blends for a reason. A building sits where it does for a reason. A neighborhood grows where access once mattered. Sometimes history is not hidden. We just forget how to read it. Ann Arbor's railroad story is important because it reminds us that the city was not built on ideas alone. It was built on connection. Detroit mattered to Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor mattered to the towns beyond it. And the railroad helped tie those stories together. Then there's the Ann Arbor that made things. The Ann Arbor that people forget. The industrial Ann Arbor. The publishing Ann Arbor. The camera-making Ann Arbor. Argus cameras came out of this city and helped put photography into the hands of everyday Americans. The Argus C3, nicknamed the Brick, became one of the most recognizable cameras of its era. It wasn't delicate. It wasn't fancy. It looked practical because it was practical. And there is something very Michigan about that. A tool made to be used. A product built for ordinary people. A camera that helped families document birthdays, vacations, soldiers, weddings, homes, and everyday life. That came from Ann Arbor. And then there was publishing and information. Ann Arbor became a place where knowledge was not only taught, but preserved, printed, copied, studied, and distributed. That's the bigger theme here. Detroit built cars. Pontiac built cars. Flint built cars. Ann Arbor built ideas. And sometimes it built the tools that helped people preserve them. That is why this city became bigger than itself. Because what happened here did not stay here. Eventually, all of these layers found their way downtown. And downtown Ann Arbor is one of the reasons that this city still works. Not perfectly. No downtown is perfect. But it works because it still feels human. Walkable blocks, old storefronts, second floor windows, alleyways, brick details, signs, restaurants, theaters, businesses that have changed over and over again while the buildings kept standing. That's what I love about historic downtowns. The business changes, the building remains, and every new tenant adds another chapter. There was a time when American downtowns were not designed around parking. They were designed around people. People walking, shopping, working, eating, going to the movies, running into neighbors, catching a train, buying something they needed from someone who knew their name. Ann Arbor still has pieces of that. And when you walk these streets, you can feel why people fight for places like this. Because a good downtown gives a city memory. It gives people a place to gather. It gives residents and visitors the same sidewalk. And it reminds us that buildings do not need to be enormous to be meaningful. They need to be useful. They need to be cared for. They need to give people a reason to come back. Kerrytown tells that story beautifully. The Ann Arbor Farmers Market has been rooted in this community since 1919. And a market is never just a place to buy food. It is a ritual. It is flowers on a Saturday morning. It is bread, produce, coffee, conversation, and running into someone you did not plan to see. It is the kind of place that turns a city into a neighborhood. And nearby, Zingerman's became one of those Ann Arbor institutions that somehow feels both local and world famous. A deli became a destination. A small idea became part of the city's identity. That happens a lot in Ann Arbor. Independent ideas become institutions here. Sometimes they grow. Sometimes they stay small. But the city has always made room for people trying to build something with a point of view. That is part of its character. You see that same character in Nichols Arcade. If you want to understand what Ann Arbor does well, walk through Nichols Arcade and look up. The glass, the tile, the storefronts, the proportions. Completed in 1918, it is not important because it is massive. It is important because it proves that ordinary commercial spaces can still be beautiful. A shopping arcade could have been forgettable. Instead, someone built something people still remember. That's architecture at its best. It slows you down. It rewards attention. It says somebody cared here. And that is exactly what historic places do when they're working. They make you notice. The Michigan Theater does the same thing, only louder. Opened in 1928, it came from a time when going to the movies was not supposed to feel disposable. Theaters were palaces. They were civic rooms. They were places where people gathered under a marquee and stepped into another world. Like so many old theaters, the Michigan Theater could have been lost. Across America, buildings like this were demolished, divided, neglected, or stripped of the very details that made them magical. But Ann Arbor saved this one. And when a city saves a theater, it saves more than a building. It saves a place where generations sat in the dark together. First dates, family nights, concerts, films, applause, memory. Preservation is not just about brick and plaster. It is about protecting the places where life happened. Leave downtown and Ann Arbor changes again. The streets get quieter. The trees get older. The porches start talking. The historic neighborhoods around Ann Arbor might be the part of the city I connect with most. The Old West Side, the Old Fourth Ward, the residential streets around campus, blocks where homes were not built to impress from a distance, but to be lived in up close. Victorian, Greek Revival, Italianate, Craftsman, Colonial Revival, Tudor. Every generation left something behind. You can see the history of the city in the houses. Not just the wealthy parts, not just the landmarks, but the everyday homes. The porches where people sat. The windows where parents watched for kids coming home. The kitchens where families made it through hard years. The old floors that carried weddings, funerals, holidays, arguments, and ordinary Tuesdays that no one thought to photograph. That's why historic homes matter. They're not just old, they're witnesses. And Ann Arbor has a lot of witnesses. But a city with beautiful buildings can still have difficult history, and Ann Arbor is no exception. Its reputation for education and progress does not mean opportunity was shared equally. Ann Arbor has a Black history that deserves to be remembered with the same care as its architecture. Black families, churches, schools, businesses, and neighborhoods helped shape the city while facing discrimination in housing, education, employment, and public life. Albert Wheeler became Ann Arbor's first Black mayor in 1975. But long before that, Black residents were building community here, organizing here, teaching here, worshiping here, fighting to be seen here. That is part of the story too, because no city gets to tell only its flattering history. If history is going to mean anything, it has to be honest. The buildings matter, but the people matter more. And sometimes the most important stories are the ones a city is slowest to recognize. That tension carries into Ann Arbor's protest history. This has always been a city where people ask questions, sometimes unforgettable ones. In the 1960s and 70s, Ann Arbor became known nationally as a place of student activism, counterculture, anti-war organizing, civil rights energy, music, and political experimentation. Depending on who you ask, that history means different things. Some people hear freedom, some hear chaos, some hear progress, some hear rebellion. But whatever you hear, you cannot deny that Ann Arbor mattered. This was not a city watching America change from a distance. It was part of the argument. And that's important, because cities people argue about are usually cities that matter. Nobody argues passionately about a place they do not care about. Ann Arbor has always had a point of view. It believes ideas should be tested. It believes institutions should be questioned. It believes young people might have something to say before the world tells them to be quiet. And whether that makes you love Ann Arbor or roll your eyes at it, that spirit is part of why this city is still recognizable. It never became neutral. It never became generic. It stayed Ann Arbor. And that may be the most important thing to understand. Ann Arbor feels different because it is made of contradictions. It is historic and constantly changing. It is local and global. It is progressive and imperfect. It is beautiful and expensive. It is proud of itself, sometimes probably too proud. It preserves old buildings while debating new ones. It celebrates community while struggling with affordability. It welcomes the world while trying not to lose its own identity. That is not failure. That is what real cities do. They wrestle with themselves. Detroit does it. Pontiac does it. Ann Arbor does it. Every place worth caring about is a constant conversation with its past and its future. The question is whether enough people care to keep that conversation honest. And that brings me to why I wanted to tell the story. Ann Arbor is not just a college town. It is not just the University of Michigan. It is not just football, restaurants, bookstores, theaters, old houses, and tree-lined streets. It is all of that. But it is also a river town, a railroad town, a market town, a protest town, a medical town, a publishing town, a preservation town, a place where ideas became an industry, a place where buildings became memory, a place where people arrived for one reason and stayed for another. And just outside the heart of Ann Arbor, there's another story waiting. A historic farmhouse that has watched this area change for generations. We are not telling that whole story today, because this episode belongs to Ann Arbor. But soon, we're going to step inside that home and give it the kind of story historic properties deserve. Not just bedrooms, not just acreage, not just square footage. A real story. The kind that reminds us every home was once new. Every field was once worked by hand. Every doorway carried generations through it. And every historic property eventually gets handed to someone new. Not just to own, but to care for. So consider this your first look. Next time, we tell the story of one remarkable Ann Arbor-area farmhouse, and why places like that still matter. That is really what History Loves Company has always been about. Not just selling homes, not just documenting buildings, but helping people slow down long enough to see the stories hiding in plain sight. And now, that mission is growing into something you can actually walk into. If you love old places, local stories, historic pieces, handmade goods, small businesses, and the kind of community that gets built one conversation at a time, come check out the Foundry by History Loves Company. We are opening the door for our soft opening on Monday, July 6, 2026 from 5 to 8 p.m. Eastern. You'll find us at 35 West Huron Street in downtown Pontiac, Michigan. The Foundry is part marketplace, part creative community, part historic storytelling hub, and honestly, it feels like the physical version of everything we have been building here. Pontiac stories, Detroit stories, Michigan stories, local creators, vintage pieces, historic objects, original ideas, and people who believe old things still have something new to say. You can also check it out online at thefoundryhlc.com, because History Loves Company was never meant to only live on a screen. It was meant to become a place where people can gather, a place where creators can start small and grow downtown, a place where the past is not treated like something dusty and forgotten, but something useful, inspiring, and alive. That is the thread that connects all of this. Ann Arbor, Pontiac, Detroit, historic homes, old theaters, farmhouses, markets, downtowns, the Foundry. It is all part of the same mission, to remind people that places matter. When I started History Loves Company, I did not want to just make videos about buildings. I wanted to understand why places matter, why some streets stay with us, why old homes feel different, why a downtown with brick storefronts and a theater marquee can make us feel connected to people that we never met, why a riverbank can hold more history than any textbook. Ann Arbor is one of those places, not because it is perfect. It is not. No city is, but because it has layers. And if you slow down long enough, those layers start talking. The river tells one story. The university tells another. The railroad tells another. The downtown tells another. The neighborhoods tell another. The market tells another. The theater tells another. The protest signs, the old porches, the storefront windows, the campus walkways, the preserved buildings, and the buildings we lost. They all tell part of the same story. A story about a small Michigan town that became bigger than itself. A story about a city that kept asking what the future could look like. And a story about why history is not something behind us. It is under our feet. It is above our heads. It is in the bricks, the trees, the river, the sidewalks, and the houses that we pass every day without noticing. So the next time you come to Ann Arbor, do not just come for the game. Do not just come for dinner. Do not just come for the university. Walk slowly. Look up. Read the buildings. Listen to the streets. And if this kind of history speaks to you, come find me at the Foundry, Monday, July 6, 2026, 5 to 8 p.m. Eastern, 35 West Huron Street in downtown Pontiac, or visit thefoundryhlc.com. Because every place has a story, every home has a story, every object has a story, and around here, history loves company. I'm Chris Hubble. Thank you for walking Ann Arbor with me. I'll see you in the next Streets of History.